Her family sold her as Barren, the widowed rancher. Said, "I don't need children, I need you." Winter came early the year Mara Hale was sold. It arrived without ceremony, without mercy, just a quiet claiming of the land. Frost stitched itself into the fields before dawn. The sky stayed low and colorless, as if it had forgotten how to open. Snow didn't fall all at once. It crept, thin, patient, inevitable. The kind of cold that didn't scream. It waited. Mara stood at the edge of her family's yard, with her shawl pulled tight, breath fogging the air in shallow bursts. The house behind her sagged under the weight of years and disappointment. Smoke leaked from the chimney in uneven puffs, like it couldn't decide whether to stay alive. No one said her name. Her mother stood in the doorway, arms folded, eyes fixed somewhere beyond Mara's shoulder, anywhere but her face. Her father was already gone, had left before sunrise to avoid the moment altogether. Cowardice dressed up as work. The wagon waited at the road. 2 men stood beside it. One held the reins, the other held the papers. "Best not linger," the man with the papers said, rubbing his gloved hands together. "Cold like this settles into the bones." Mara nodded, though her bones had been cold for years. They had used the word barren like a verdict, whispered it at first, then said it aloud once it became useful, as if her body had failed at something it was born owing, as if love were a transaction and she had defaulted. No one mentioned the years she spent trying. No one mentioned the doctor's quiet shake of the head, the way his eyes slid away when he said, "Sometimes there's no reason." No one mentioned the nights Mara lay awake counting cracks in the ceiling while her husband turned his back to her, grief hardening into blame. Widowed at 26, childless, a burden. The papers were signed quickly, too quickly. Mara stepped into the wagon without being told. The wood was cold even through her skirts. The seat smelled of hay and old leather. She folded her hands in her lap, fingers numb, and stared straight ahead as the reins snapped and the horses lurched forward. Her mother did not wave. Snow began to fall as they left the property behind. Small flakes at first, careful ones, like the sky was testing whether Mara would look back. She didn't. The journey took hours, maybe longer. Time thinned the way it does when you stop expecting anything from it. The road narrowed as the land opened, white fields stretching out under a sky that felt too close. Fence posts disappeared under drifts. Trees stood bare and watchful, their branches black against the snow. When the wagon finally slowed, Mara felt it before she saw it. The quiet changed, deepened. The ranch sat alone at the end of a long, snow-choked drive. No neighbors, no town lights bleeding into the distance. Just a wide, low house built from dark timber and stone, smoke rising straight and steady from its chimney. The barn beyond it leaned slightly, but not from neglect, more like an old man favoring one knee. The man waiting on the porch did not step forward. He stood with his hands resting on the railing, shoulders broad beneath a heavy coat, hat pulled low against the wind. His beard was threaded with gray, not old, just weathered, the kind of face shaped by silence more than words. Widowed rancher, they had said. Elias Crow. The men jumped down first. One cleared his throat. "Mr. Crow," he called, "we've brought her." Elias nodded once. That was all. Mara waited for him to look at her the way men always did. Quick, assessing, disappointed. She waited for the flinch, the calculation. It didn't come. His eyes moved to her slowly, not scanning but settling, as if he were learning the shape of her presence rather than judging it. They were a pale gray, the color of winter light on steel. "She knows the arrangement?" Elias asked. "Yes," the man with the papers said. Family was clear. Elias's jaw tightened, just barely. "I wasn't asking them." The men exchanged a glance. One of them looked at Mara. "Do you understand why you're here?" Mara swallowed. Her throat burned with the cold. "Yes." Elias studied her a moment longer, then stepped down from the porch. His boots crunched through the snow with deliberate slowness, as if sudden movement might fracture something fragile. "You can leave," he said to the men. Not unkindly. Final. They didn't argue. Money had already changed hands. The wagon turned around, wheels groaning, and just like that, the road erased itself behind them. Snow filled the tracks within minutes. Mara stood alone with him. The wind cut sharper here, unhindered by trees. It pressed against her like a question she didn't have the strength to answer. Elias gestured toward the house. "You'll want to warm up." She nodded again, stepped stiff as she followed him inside. The house smelled of wood smoke and something savory, soup maybe. Heat wrapped around her the moment the door closed, making her dizzy. The walls were simple, clean, no clutter, no signs of children. A single coat hung by the door. Another, older, rested unused on a peg, dusted with time. Elias took off his gloves, set them on the table. "You don't have to speak right now," he said. "Or ever. This isn't that kind of arrangement." Mara looked at him then, really looked, at the lines around his eyes, the stillness in him, the grief that lived there, quiet but permanent, like winter ground beneath snow. "I was told," she said carefully, voice thin, "that you needed a wife." Elias met her gaze, held it. "I don't need children," he said. A pause, heavy, intentional. "I need you to know that first." Something in her chest shifted. Not hope, not yet. Just space. He nodded toward the fire. "Sit, warm yourself. Supper's almost ready." Mara moved toward the hearth, hands trembling as she extended them to the heat. Snow melted from her hem, dripping onto the floor. For the first time that day, her breath slowed. Behind her, Elias added quietly, "You weren't sold to me, Mara Hale." She stiffened. "You were given a place," he said. "That's all." Outside, the snow kept falling, steady now, certain. Winter had claimed her, but for the first time, it didn't feel like an ending. Night settled over the ranch like a held breath. The fire burned low and steady, its warmth pushing back the cold that pressed against the windows, testing the glass, searching for a way in. Outside, wind dragged itself along the walls, a long, lonely sound that felt older than the house itself. Mara sat at the small wooden table with a bowl of stew cradled between her palms. The ceramic was chipped along the rim, imperfect, real. Steam curled upward, fogging her vision. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until the smell reached her. Salt, root vegetables, something smoked and slow-cooked. Survival food, the kind made by someone who knew winter intimately. Elias sat across from her, not watching her eat. He focused on his own bowl, spoon moving with an unhurried rhythm. No expectations pressed into the silence, no measuring. It unsettled her more than judgment would have. She took a bite, then another. The warmth spread downward, easing the tight knot in her stomach. Her shoulders dropped without her permission. After a while, Elias spoke. "The guest room is yours," he said. "End of the hall. Stove's been lit since afternoon. If it gets cold in the night, there's extra wood stacked by the door." She nodded. "Thank you." Her voice sounded unfamiliar in the room, like it hadn't been used much lately. When the meal was done, Elias stood and took the bowls without comment. Mara made to help, but he shook his head gently. "You've traveled," he said. "Rest." She hesitated, then obeyed. The floor creaked softly beneath her steps as she walked down the narrow hallway. Each door she passed was closed. No laughter leaked through the walls, no echoes of another life, just quiet, thick, honest. The guest room was small but warm. A narrow bed made up with heavy quilts, a basin of water set near the stove, a single window rimmed with frost, moonlight silvering the glass. Mara sat on the edge of the bed and removed her boots. Her fingers lingered on the laces longer than necessary, as if untying them meant something final. When she finally lay back, the mattress dipped under her weight, unfamiliar but welcoming. She stared at the ceiling until sleep came in pieces, not dreams, memories. The way her late husband used to turn away from her in the dark. The way silence could bruise worse than words. The sound of her mother's voice when she said, "We don't have a choice anymore." Winter outside groaned. Snow slid from the roof in slow avalanches. Somewhere down the hall, Elias moved quietly, the sound of his boots measured, deliberate, a man accustomed to listening. Morning arrived pale and sharp. Mara woke to the sound of chopping, steady strikes, wood splitting cleanly. Light seeped through the frost-laced window, turning the room blue and white. cold had crept in overnight despite the stove, settling into her bones like a reminder. She dressed quickly, layering what little she owned. When she stepped into the kitchen, Elias was already there, cheeks flushed from the cold, snow dusting his shoulders. He set down a bundle of firewood and nodded once in greeting. "Coffee's on," he said. She poured herself a cup, hands wrapped around the tin mug. The bitterness was grounding, real. They ate in near silence, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the distant lowing of cattle from the barn. Outside, the world was buried under white, fences reduced to half-lines, the land simplified to essentials. After breakfast, Elias pulled on his coat. "I need to check the north fence. Drift came in heavy overnight." Mara hesitated. "I can help, if you'd like." He paused, studying her, not weighing her usefulness, but her willingness. "You don't have to." "I know," she said, "but I'd like to." A moment passed, then he nodded. "All right, dress warm." The cold hit her like a living thing the moment she stepped outside. It stole her breath, bit at her cheeks, seeped through seams she hadn't known existed. Snow crunched loud beneath her boots, the sound carrying far in the open air. They walked side by side, not touching, their breaths visible between them. The sky was a hard, endless gray, sun muted behind cloud. At the fence line, snow had piled high, bowing the wire. Elias worked with quiet efficiency, gloved hands tightening, adjusting. Mara followed his lead, clearing snow, holding posts steady. Her fingers numbed quickly, pain blooming sharp and bright before dulling. She didn't complain. At one point, she slipped on ice, hidden beneath powder. Elias caught her arm instinctively, grip firm but careful. She steadied herself, heart racing, not from the fall, but from the contact. "Thank you," she murmured. He released her immediately, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. "You all right?" "Yes." They finished the work without further incident. By the time they returned to the house, Mara's hands were shaking from cold and exhaustion. Elias noticed. "Inside," he said. "Now." He set her by the fire and poured warm water over her fingers, rubbing life back into them with slow, deliberate pressure. Not intimate, not distant, just necessary. She watched him from beneath her lashes, the care in his movements, the absence of expectation. "I was told," she said quietly, "that you didn't mind my condition." His hands stilled. "You were told wrong," he said after a moment. "I mind that anyone thought they had the right to name you by what you lack." Her throat tightened. "My family said—" "I know what they said," Elias interrupted gently, "and I don't agree." Silence stretched between them, filled with the fire's steady breathing. "My wife," he continued, eyes on her hands, "died 7 winters ago. Fever took her, took our son with her." Mara's breath caught. "I buried them both in frozen ground," he said. "Hardest work I ever did." He released her hands and stood, turning away as if to give the words space. "When people heard I'd agreed to this," he said, "they assumed I was desperate for heirs, for legacy." He looked back at her then, gaze steady. "I'm done measuring life by what survives me," he said. "I just didn't want to face another winter alone." The fire popped, sending a spark upward. Mara swallowed hard. "Neither did I." Outside, the wind rose again, rattling the windows. Winter pressed close, listening. But inside, something fragile and stubborn began to take shape. Not warmth exactly, but the promise of it. The storm arrived 2 nights later. It announced itself with silence first, the kind that presses against the ears, that makes animals restless and men uneasy. Elias noticed it when the cattle shifted more than usual in the pen, when the horses refused to settle. Mara felt it in her bones before she ever heard the wind. Snow began falling after sundown. Not gentle, not patient. It came sideways, sharp and relentless, rattling the shutters like an accusation. By the time darkness fully settled, the world beyond the windows had disappeared into white noise. They ate supper closer to the fire that night. Elias added more wood than usual. Mara noticed how his movements sharpened, how his eyes kept drifting to the windows, measuring the storm's mood. Winter was not just weather here. It was an adversary, one you respected or paid for later. "You ever been through a blizzard like this?" he asked. Mara shook her head. "Not this far from town." He nodded once. "Then stay close to the house. If the roof gives or the stove falters, I'll handle it." She didn't miss the eye, the way he didn't say we yet. The wind howled harder after midnight. Mara woke to it clawing at the walls, the sound threading itself into her dreams until she couldn't tell where sleep ended and fear began. She sat up, heart racing, the cold sharper than before despite the stove's glow. Then she heard it, a dull crack, followed by another. She pulled on her boots and shawl and stepped into the hallway just as Elias emerged from his room, already dressed, lantern in hand. "Barn," he said. "Roof beam might be giving." "I'm coming," she said too quickly. He hesitated. Outside, the wind screamed louder, as if offended by the idea of being challenged. "It's dangerous." "So is staying," she replied quietly. Something in her voice, steady, unyielding, made him nod. They stepped into the storm together. The cold was vicious now, biting through layers, stealing breath, blinding. Snow struck her face like thrown gravel. Elias moved ahead, lantern held low, one hand reaching back to steady her when the wind shoved hard. The barn loomed out of the white like a wounded animal. One side sagged, snow piling heavy against the roof. Inside, the cattle shifted anxiously, their breath steaming thick in the air. A beam groaned overhead. Elias shouted instructions she barely heard. She followed instinct more than words, bracing posts, clearing snow where he pointed, muscles burning, lungs screaming. At one point, her foot slipped and she went down hard, knee striking frozen ground. Pain flared hot and sharp. Elias was there instantly, hauling her up, his grip iron. "That's enough," he shouted. "Inside, now. I can still. Mara." He said her name like a command and a plea all at once. She nodded, teeth chattering violently, and let him guide her back through the storm. By the time they reached the house, her hands were numb, her leg throbbing, exhaustion dragging at her like deep water. Elias shut the door behind them and leaned it closed, breathing hard. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then her knees buckled. He caught her before she hit the floor, arms coming around her without thought, without restraint. She clung to his coat, shaking, face pressed into the wool, the smell of smoke and cold, and him grounding her in a way nothing else had. "It's all right," he murmured, voice low near her ear. "I've got you." The words broke something open. She cried then, not loudly, not dramatically, just quiet, shaking sobs that soaked into his coat, grief and fear and the weight of being unwanted all spilling out at once. Elias held her. Not like a man holding a woman he owed something from, not like obligation or arrangement. Like someone who understood the cost of standing alone in winter and chose, deliberately, not to let her do it anymore. He carried her to the hearth and sat with her on the floor, her back against his chest, blanket wrapped around both of them. He rubbed warmth back into her hands, slow and patient, the storm roaring its fury outside, while inside the fire fought back inch by inch. "I was told," Mara whispered hoarsely, "that I was worth less because I couldn't give a man a child." Elias's jaw tightened behind her. They were wrong. "What if they're not?" she asked, the question small and terrified. He rested his chin lightly against her hair. "Then I'll be wrong with you." She turned to look at him, eyes red, searching. "You don't owe me pity," she said, "or kindness." "I know," he replied. "That's why I'm giving you honesty." He met her gaze fully now, no retreat, no shadow. "I don't want you for what your body can produce," he said. "I want you for the way you stood in that storm without asking what you'd get in return." Her breath hitched. "For the way you carry silence like you've learned how to survive inside it," he continued. "For the way this house feels less hollow when you're in it." The storm raged on, but something between them settled. Quiet, solid, undeniable. Mara leaned into him again, not out of weakness, but choice. Outside, winter tested the world. Inside, two people learned what it meant to endure it together. The blizzard burned itself out by morning. It didn't leave quietly. Snow lay piled against the house in sculpted drifts, wind-carved and unforgiving. Fence posts were half buried. The world beyond the windows looked erased, reduced to white and shadow, and the long blue hush that followed violence. Mara woke on the hearthrug, the fire down to embers. Elias's coat was still wrapped around her shoulders. Her knee throbbed in a deep, aching way, but the sharpness had dulled. She shifted slightly, and realized she wasn't alone. Elias sat nearby, back against the wall, head tipped forward, eyes closed, but not sleeping. One hand rested loosely on his knee, the other still close enough that if she moved an inch, she'd touch him. He opened his eyes when she stirred. "Morning?" he said quietly. "Did the barn?" "Held," he replied. "Lost a section of fencing, but nothing that won't mend." Relief loosened something in her chest. She tried to sit up and winced. Elias was there instantly, steadying her with one hand at her elbow. "Easy. I don't want to be a burden," she said before she could stop herself. His hand stilled. "Mara," he said, not sharply, but firmly. "Winter is a burden. Pain is a burden. You are not." The words settled heavy and warm, like stones placed carefully so a crossing could be made. He helped her to the chair by the fire and set about making tea. The routine seemed to steady him as much as it did her. Kettle on, cups out, no wasted motion. When he knelt to look at her knee, his brow furrowed. "Bruised," he said. "No break." She nodded. "I've had worse." "I know," he said, and something about the way he said it told her he meant more than her knee. The day passed slow and enclosed, the storm's aftermath hemming them in. Elias brought in snow melt for water. Mara folded laundry she found in a basket near the stove, movements careful, deliberate. Every task felt shared, even when done alone. By late afternoon, the sky cleared just enough to let in a weak, watery light. The land glittered cruelly beautiful, all sharp edges and silence. That was when the sound came. Hooves. Distant at first, then closer. Elias stiffened. Mara felt it too. That tightening. That sense of being seen again after finally believing you were hidden. He went to the window, pulled the curtain back just enough to see. His shoulders tensed. "2 riders," he said. "From the east." Her stomach dropped. "From town?" "Maybe." They didn't speak as the riders approached. Snow muffled the sound, but the presence pressed heavy all the same. Elias pulled on his coat, then hesitated. "Stay here," he said. "I won't," she replied, voice steady, despite the fear crawling up her spine. He studied her, searching for hesitation, found none. "All right," he said finally, "but stand behind me." They stepped onto the porch together. The riders reined in a short distance away. Men bundled against the cold, faces pinched and wary. One dismounted slowly, eyes sharp as broken glass. "Elias Crow," the man called. "Word travels, even in winter." Elias didn't move. "Funny thing," he said. "Most folks prefer it doesn't." The man's gaze slid to Mara, lingered too long. Recognition flickered there. "That her?" he asked. Mara felt the word hit her like a shove. Elias stepped slightly in front of her without looking back. "You have business here?" The man smiled thinly. Family's been asking questions, wondering if their arrangement was honored. Mara's hands clenched at her sides. "She's here by choice," Elias said. The man laughed softly. "Is that so?" Elias's voice dropped, quiet but iron. "You don't get to doubt it." Silence stretched. Wind lifted loose snow from the porch in small, swirling ghosts. Finally the man shrugged. "Just checking. Cold makes people nervous." He mounted his horse again. "Winter's a long season," he added. "Careful what you take in. Some things don't survive it." The riders turned and left, their tracks quickly swallowed by drifting snow. Mara didn't realize she was shaking until Elias reached back and took her hand. They went inside without a word. Later, as dusk bled into night, Mara stood by the window, watching darkness claim the land again. Elias poured 2 cups of whiskey and handed one to her. She accepted it, fingers brushing his. "They'll talk," she said. "I know. My family doesn't own you," he said gently. She looked at him then, really looked, at the lines etched by grief, at the steadiness beneath them. "What happens," she asked quietly, "when winter ends?" He considered that, took a slow drink. Then we see what's grown beneath it, he said. The fire crackled low. Mara stepped closer, close enough that she could feel his warmth without touching, close enough that the space between them felt deliberate. I don't want to be sent away when the thaw comes, she said. I don't want to be temporary. Elias set his cup down. You're not, he said. She searched his face. Even if I never give you... He stopped her with a look, not unkind, but resolute. I told you, he said. I don't need children. I need you. The words landed softly but left no room for doubt. Mara's breath shuddered out of her. She reached for him then, not desperate, not unsure, just honest. Her hand rested against his chest, felt the steady proof of him beneath it. Elias covered her hand with his own. They stood that way for a long time, winter pressing at the walls, the fire holding. The world narrowed to what mattered. Outside, the cold waited. Inside, something endured. The cold loosened its grip slowly, not with mercy. Winter never apologized, but with fatigue. Snow softened at the edges. Icicles thinned and wept. The days stretched, pale light lingering a little longer before surrendering to dusk. Mara noticed the change in small ways. The way the floor no longer burned her feet through her boots. The way the cattle's breath no longer steamed quite so thick in the mornings. The way Elias no longer carried winter in his shoulders every moment of the day. But something else lingered too. Fear didn't vanish with the snow. It waited. The final test came on a morning that looked deceptively calm. The sky was clear, painfully blue. Snow glittered like glass shards underfoot. Mara stood at the table kneading dough, hands dusted white, the rhythm grounding her. Elias was lacing his coat when the knock came. 3 sharp raps, not hesitant, not polite. Mara's hand stilled. Elias met her eyes across the room. No words passed between them, but understanding did. He nodded once. Stay here, and crossed to the door. When he opened it, cold rushed in with the men. 2 this time, not the riders from before. These wore town coats and carried authority like a weapon poorly concealed. One held folded papers, the other scanned the room like he already owned it. Elias Crow, the taller one said. We need a word. Elias stepped onto the porch, blocking their view inside. Say it. The man with the papers cleared his throat. There's been concern raised regarding a woman residing on your property, claims of improper exchange, sale under duress. Mara felt her heart pound hard enough to shake her ribs. She's inside, the second man said flatly. We'd like to hear from her directly. Elias didn't move. She won't be questioned like livestock, he said. Not here. The man's eyes hardened. Then you leave us little choice. Mara stepped forward before Elias could stop her. I'll speak, she said. Both men looked past Elias, surprised. She came to stand beside him, not behind. Her hands trembled, but her voice didn't. I was not taken, she said. I was not tricked. I am here because I chose to stay. The man with the papers raised an eyebrow. Your family tells a different story. My family, Mara replied, sold their relief, not me. Silence stretched. And what, the second man asked, do you receive here in return? Mara looked at Elias, just once. Then she faced them again. Dignity, she said. Safety. A place where I am not reduced to what my body failed to do. The men exchanged glances. The paper rustled. This arrangement is irregular, the taller one said carefully. So is winter, Elias replied. But we endure it anyway. Another long moment passed. Wind brushed loose snow from the eaves. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called, early, defiant. Finally, the man folded the papers. No law broken, he said reluctantly, so long as the woman remains here by consent. She does, Elias said. Mara didn't look away. The men turned and left without another word. The door closed. The house felt suddenly too quiet. Mara exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her knees threatened to give, but she stayed upright, stayed steady. Elias turned to her slowly. You didn't have to do that, he said. Yes, she replied softly. I did. Something changed in his eyes then. Not fear, not protectiveness, but pride, clean and unburdened. Spring crept closer after that, not blooming, This land was never generous, but thawing. Mud replaced ice. The creek broke free from its frozen lid, water rushing loud and reckless, like it was making up for lost time. Mara planted seeds near the south wall of the house, fingers buried in cold soil, trusting something unseen to rise. Elias repaired fencing, his movements lighter, less guarded. They worked side by side often now, conversation flowing in quiet currents, shared meals, shared labor, shared stillness. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the snowmelt gold, Elias stood beside her at the edge of the field. "There's something I need to ask you," he said. Her heart stuttered. "All right." He took off his gloves, held them loosely. "I never wanted this to be something you endured," he said. "I wanted it to be something you chose, every day." She turned toward him fully. "I choose it," she said. "I choose you." He nodded, like he'd needed to hear it spoken aloud. "I can't promise ease," he said, "or safety, or that the world will ever stop judging." She smiled faintly. "It never has." Then carefully, as if handling something precious and breakable, Elias reached into his coat and withdrew a small box. Not polished, not ornate. Just honest wood, worn smooth by hands that worked for a living. "I don't need children," he said again, voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. "I don't need legacy carved in blood or name." He opened the box. Inside was a simple band, gold dulled by time. "I need a partner," he continued. "Someone who will stand beside me when winter comes back, and it will. Someone who stays because she wants to." Mara felt tears rise, hot and sudden. She didn't answer with words. She reached out and took the ring, slid it onto her finger. "Yes," she whispered. They didn't kiss dramatically, didn't need spectacle. Elias rested his forehead against hers, breath mingling, winter finally loosening its hold. "I was called Barren," Mara said softly. He smiled against her hair. "Then the world never learned what grows in quiet soil." That night, the stars burned sharp and clear. Snow reflected their light like 1,000 scattered promises. Inside the house, the fire glowed steady and warm. Spring would come. But when winter returned, and it always did, they would meet it together, not as a transaction, not as survival, but as choice.